This is the CNC Geekcast, the podcast where two guys with speech impediments talk about movies. I'm Joseph Collins.
And I'm Paul Combs.
And on today's episode, we'll be talking about one of my favorite movies, Star Trek movies, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. We're going to be talking about the characters, we're going to talk about the plot, why this movie is my favorite, and a personal cinema experience I have with this movie, and much more. So stay tuned!
Also, today we're actually joined by a second Collins.
Oh my goodness, there's more of us?
There's way too many of you guys.
Look, you can never have too many Collinses.
But anyway, introduce yourself, Jeffrey.
Hey, I'm Jeffrey, Joseph's older brother. Star Trek VI is also my favorite Star Trek movie. I'm looking forward to talking about it. Hope you enjoy.
My thank you, Jeffrey. That was nice.
That was very nice. We're glad to have you, Jeffrey. It's always fun to add more people to our conversation, even if I'm kind of the outsider here.
Yeah, you are, aren't you?
Yeah.
You are now outnumbered.
I am definitely outnumbered, but I've never been a Star Trek fan. Like, I don't have anything against it, but it's just one of those things that's intimidating. There's so much of it. There's like 5 different series, there's all these different movies, there's everything. There's so much.
Yeah, that's a common complaint with a lot of Star Trek.
Well, if you want, I can give you a list of episodes you can watch in each season, like the best episodes.
Yeah, if someone did that, I would be more than happy to. Like, if someone curated the quintessential Star Trek episodes, I would be more than happy to watch them.
Yeah, there was one episodes like in the Next Generation where it's like the Borg episode, the 3 Borg
Best
episodes.
of both worlds.
Well, the one they encounter in the second season, and then the best of both worlds.
You kind of have to go to the second season too.
Yeah, but anyway, but this movie has, it's the original cast, and you saw it recently. What was your initial thoughts?
I watched it for the first time actually last night.
Okay.
And it was quintessentially Star Trek. I like it. Even though I'm not a Star Trek fan, I understand what makes Star Trek what it is. You had Kirk macking up space women. You had Spock
Being Spock logical.
Being Spock Mr. Logical. And you had the crew. You had Scotty having some fantastically great lines, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Scotty always has some good lines, but I mean, I understand why people love Star Trek, and this movie kind of sealed that deal for me. And I definitely did enjoy the film, the way it tackled a lot of elements that were frankly very interesting.
Yeah, because this movie was inspired, it came up in December 6th, 1991, and this was a couple years after the fall of the Soviet Union, and that's what inspired this movie, because Paramount, I think it was after 1989, Star Trek V came out, and was considered to be a critical and really flop, and not really considered that good. Star Trek V is
Graphics were terrible. The plot was kind of
Yeah, and it was definitely considered to be one of the worst Star Trek films of all time. So Paramount was like, oh, well, maybe we should reboot this like they did in 2009. But they decided to come out with Star Trek VI instead to have the original cast send them off on a high note. And the entire idea that Leonard Nimoy had and the writer was talking about is, why don't we do something about the Soviet Union? And they took the Klingon Empire and the Federation and they tackled it from that perspective. And that's one of the things I did like about this film, compared to Wrath of Khan, which is considered to be the best film. But Wrath of Khan is more of a submarine battle in space, if you on that level, like Hunt for Red October and Crimson Tide.
Crimson Tide, yes.
Yeah, so... But no, I like that's one of the main
things. For the classic movie fans.
Well, this and The Wrath of Khan are actually the only two Star Trek films I've seen. Truthfully, I still think The Wrath of Khan is a better movie.
Okay, I can understand.
Totally disagree with you there, sir.
But okay, but
well, it helps that you have the central villain. I'm always drawn to the villains, drawn to films that have the larger-than-life villain. And while The Undiscovered Country, I did think was a very good film, you really didn't get that.
Yeah, but the problem was Khan was a bit mustache-twirling in Wrath of Khan.
That is a legitimate complaint, but Richard Montalban's just sold it for me, and it worked.
Fair enough, but I feel Chang was a lot more subtle, and that's what you want in a villain. You want the subtle villain who people can relate to, not the larger-than-life, ho ho ho, Kirk, I will get my revenge, mustache twirler.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also like the Star Trek VI, and I think it's my personal, one of the reasons my personal favorite is because of the larger implications of the universe. During this time, you had Star Trek, The Next Generation was on for 4 seasons. And you had a character as Lieutenant Worf was a Klingon. And the Klingons and Federation, of course, used to be enemies, but now they're friends. And this movie did a very good job of explaining the starting point of that alliance that they had between the two.
Kind of what got the snowball rolling, so to speak.
Exactly.
And we Star Trek fans were really looking forward to it when we were watching TNG, because we were like, okay, how did this happen? Where did this start? And so it was cool to see that.
And it was also awesome. There was the original cast members, the ones that started one, because they had that direct connection between that and the Next Generation. I really do enjoy that. I also enjoy the fact that the movie also tackled prejudices between. I mean, Cook. You would think that Federation officers were not supposed to be that way. You would think they had a higher morality, and they put the prejudice behind them when it comes to one another. No, the human prejudice toward one another. He had no racism, he had no sexism toward other human beings. But this movie did a really good job of showing, yeah, but can you do that with other alien races? Can you expand that out? And I love that theme of how it tackled, showing that human beings still had a long way to go in that sense.
No, but if you hadn't seen, especially the end of Star Trek 3, you would not know that Kirk did not like Klingons because his son was killed by one of the Klingons.
Yeah.
Well, truthfully, I didn't know that. The movie introduced that element to me, but I knew enough about Star Trek just by, I guess you'd say, symbiosis.
Yeah.
That I knew that the Klingon and the Federation were enemies. So I understood enough backdrop to understand that, even without the information in Star Trek 3.
Yeah, this is really good. A self-contained movie.
But it also helps work with Kirk's character, because much like Star Trek 2 was about him stranding Khan on the planet and Khan coming back and
Exacting his revenge.
This one was, can Kirk move forward from hating Klingons?
Yeah, all Klingons, not just
all Klingons. He blanketed all Klingons together just because of this one Klingon's act.
Yeah,
like a lot of people do.
One thing, and I really did like how.
Well, that is what a lot of people do. So I think the movie did a good job tackling that element, because I could definitely notice the way it was using the future in these fantastical situations to examine the lens of modern society. It's things we still face today, even almost 30 years after this movie was released.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's so many things I like about this film compared to the Wrath of Khan. Wrath of Khan is, like I said, it was a submarine battle. It was a revenge story. It was really just a small event that took place in this small speck of the galaxy. But this film had wider implications. It had a kind of a mystery on it. It was kind of like the murder on the Orient Express train. You had this self-contained spaceship. They're all trying to figure out who the murderers are, who are the assassins. And I just love that aspect of the film.
And
too.
when the movie revealed that it was a bunch of Federation members who were resistant to change, that was even better for the movie, because again, it goes back to the prejudice thing we were talking about.
Yeah, well, Starfleet was supposed to be beyond that point.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet it just did a good job of showing that, like Cook said, some people are afraid of change, even in Starfleet. So it did a good job of showing that, the flaws in Starfleet and Klingons it's still there, and there's still a lot to move on from.
My problem was just the mystery. It was it was immediately obvious to me who the conspirators were. I don't know if it's just like the movie watch knowledge, because you're kind of omniscient in regards to movies. When you're watching a movie, you have a perspective that none of the characters have. But it was immediately obvious, because General Shang immediately refers to himself as a warrior. That is how he identifies himself. So of course he's kind of going to be resistant to change, because if the peace is brokered, that makes him obsolete.
Well, I do somewhat disagree with that, because Klingons are known as a warrior race. It's something that their entire society was built upon. All of them were warriors.
Well, I understand.
All considered that.
I do understand that. But
Yeah.
Shang is the only one that specifically refers to himself as a warrior.
Well, yes, but at the same time, if you've seen Star Trek, I mean, you're someone who hasn't seen Star Trek, so it's understandable for you. But for someone who has seen Star Trek, all the Klingons refer to them as that. So he's just one of
they have a huge pride in being the most boss
honorable
warrior as
warriors.
possible.
But also, the entire foundation was a warrior race. Honor is the main thing. You bring honor, and if you insult them, you dishonor them, and they'll go out there to, as we establish that honor. So, from a Star Trek standpoint, from a fan standpoint, he was just being any other Klingon from that standpoint. It was the Chancellor that was different.
Yeah.
He was the one who wanted peace.
Yeah.
And who fought for peace, and that was the difference.
And he was the one that they were afraid of. The other Klingons were afraid of.
Yeah, because
they didn't necessarily want peace, because they thought that would affect their warrior
the
race.
Empire, and this actually came back in the original, in like Deep Space Nine. well, it basically was saying that many people felt that the Klingon Empire was being too, passive, and it's like, we need to fight, we need to expand our empire, we are warriors, like, go out there and fight for battle. And
it links back.
So, but I understand it from your perspective because you didn't have invested.
To answer his criticism about the mystery, I feel that them hiding the mystery was not for the audience's sake, but it was for the character's sake. The characters can't know what we know. As we all know, that's known as meta. And if you use that in writing, it becomes very obnoxious.
I can understand that. I guess I didn't think of it from the writing perspective. Yeah. But just as a moviegoer and as someone that honestly tends to over-examine movies, it did bother me.
Well, you're a critic.
I do identify myself as a movie critic, so I guess it is logical for me to
overanalyze, of course.
But of course, logic is only the beginning of wisdom, not the end.
Quoting a line from the film. So, no, but like I said, I do understand where you're coming from, and I do agree with that. But from a Star Trek standpoint, like we said, all Klingons identify, but what for me the thing was the Federation involvement. You had Romulans conspiring with the Federation officers, conspiring against Klingons, to basically just continue this war, and that's one of many things I love about this film.
Well, that happens a lot in just the modern day, and all the days for that matter, I guess I should say, is people conspire to keep the status quo.
Yeah.
Like, they're resistant to change in all its forms.
Yeah, another thing I like about this film is the fact that you had people feeling like if peace was accomplished, they would have no place anymore. They would you had Chane in the end or the beginning of the battle, he said, this is the way you want it to be, Kirk. It's like warrior versus warrior. Because the entire original series, it's been 25 years since the original series came out at that point. And you saw Kirk always, and he actually said it in the movie role, the difference between me and you, Spock, is that I always rushed into action. I always, got in there, started throwing punches, and that was my thing. Of course, Spock was more calculated and logical.
Well, he said they were two ends of the opposite coin, with the truth being somewhere in the middle.
And that goes back to the relationship that Gene Roddenberry wanted. You had Kirk, which was that aspect of it. Spock was the logical aspect, and McCoy was the emotional. So you had that trinity and that relationship, and they all balanced one another out. That was the entire idea. So that line referred back to that idea. But I just loved how, Kirk needed to understand and realize, my time is gone. It does a really good job. Seeing how this was the last time the original series was going to be on film, they did a very good job of hammering home that point. That's one of the reasons I love about it. The idea of people not being able to let go and learning to let go of the past.
Also, this movie had one of the more in-depth female Vulcan of Star Trek. Now, Kirstie Alley did a great job in Star Trek 3 and 2 and 3. Yeah. And she was fine. She was more the quintessential Vulcan.
Yeah.
Valeris was more the young Vulcan questioning whether or not the logic in this situation was correct.
Well, that's the thing.
And that she came up with her own interpretation of what was logical, and in her mind, not going to peace was more logical.
Yeah, that was another thing I liked about this film, is that the logic, even though the Vulcans went with the most logical thing, logic can take you on two different paths.
Yeah. And her character arc was extremely fascinating for as limited as it was in the movie.
Yeah, and this goes back to the original and to the story that we both had, the personal stories we both had when we went to see this movie for the first time, which we would get into.
Yeah.
But yeah. What else did you like about the film?
As I said, I always enjoyed the relationship between all the crew members. Even like George Takei, Sulu, who was introduced into this.
Oh, I love.
I'm not familiar with Star Trek, but I understood that Sulu was a crew member at one point. So of course he had that relationship with Spock and relationship with Kirk, where he would do almost anything within his power to help him.
Yeah, I also like the fact that they gave him a command in this one, that he actually had a command of the ship. Like, he actually had, he was a captain, and George Takei wanted that evolution for his character, and I'm really glad that they gave him that evolution. It also gave the ability to have another ship to help the Enterprise when they were in need.
And one of the best Star Trek ending battles, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's another issue I have, though, the bird of prey thing. Like, they immediately start positing that the bird of prey cloaked itself and then fired, even though that was previously impossible. It just felt a little too convenient for me that was the first option they decided upon, and it was the one that was correct.
Well, I mean, Spock did say, he did quote Sherlock Holmes on that. He said, like, no matter, after all the other logical options are exhausted, no matter how improbable, that must be the truth. I mean, they had a neutron, an energy surge.
Neutron surge.
Yeah, that was like, well, it can't be from the Enterprise. Where else could it be from? It's like, who else could it be? Logically speaking, it's like, who else knew about this?
And if every ship, as they established, creates some kind of gas venting.
Yeah.
And I guess neutron radiation was one of the many things that radiates in space.
And logically, no one else knew about the meeting. The Romans didn't know. Any other species that had cloaking devices wouldn't know. So the most logical option would be either a bird of prey or another Klingon ship.
No, I get that. I mean, I do understand it. It just felt convenient when I was watching the movie.
Well, of course it's convenient, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I did like it because of the fact that it created... I mean, that's one of my favorite scenes of the film. Before that moment, you had a simple Star Trek, movie where it was like, okay, they established the idea, the plot, the MacGuffin, the mission. And so the Enterprise went out on the mission, everyday thing. You had the hopeful theme, the nice, pleasant theme. And then when the Klingons showed up, that dark theme appeared. And then suddenly it's like, they had the feast, which I love the dinner scene in this film. I just love that aspect of the film.
Yeah, the awkwardness, but also the fact that they were quoting
Shakespeare
and other well-known human historical figures back and forth. That was awesome.
Yeah.
No, it was awesome because you could see kind of the beginning there, that they weren't necessarily as different as they thought they were.
Yeah.
Like, they had some different cultures, like with the way the Klingons ate, and that disgusted her.
Yeah.
But, like, they weren't necessarily as different as they thought they were.
There was some common ground, but
it's like if the Vikings had met the Italians from the Renaissance era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the Renaissance era Italians would be like, whoa, these Vikings' table manners are terrible.
The barbarics, barbarians. But
even though historically Vikings weren't as barbaric as we all think.
Yeah, but I also loved it because when you got to the point where, okay, they were drunk, they detected neutron surge. I love that sequence because suddenly the way the camera worked was, it was shaky, it was quick cuts. It really did a very good job, and once the two assassins beamed on board, it did a really good job of showing chaos and showing just like, you don't know what's going on as the audience, just like the crew didn't know what was going on. There was sporadic. They was like, what's going on? We're not supposed to fire. It's like, and people had all this information. Did we not fire?
And the sound design in that whole sequence is some of the better sound design I've heard in a Star Trek movie.
Oh yeah,
because everything was turned up to 11 on the footsteps and the laser fire and the calm chatter and all of that added to that sense of chaos.
Well, it added weight because you understood the implication of each laser blast in this situation. You understood what that could necessarily do for the peace agreement.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's one of many things I love about that scene, and it was just a great job. And then after they got done assassinating the Chancellor, the camera angles calmed down. Everything was back.
The lights went back on this Klingon ship when the artificial gravity kicked back in.
And so the audience, it did a very good job of getting the audience set back into the same situation. Like, all the chaos is now done, and now, okay, just like in real life, after everything settled down, it got back to trying to, let's figure out what happened. So I thought that was a really good job from the camera standpoint.
I like the way the characters understood the weight of everything, too. Like, even Bones and Kirk, they immediately put themselves in a dangerous situation to try to salvage it any way they can.
Yeah, I mean,
because they understood the necessity of it.
I mean, they may not have agreed on it, but they were still Starfleet officers. That was their duty, and they were going to complete their duty. So that's another thing I love about this film. But the ending battle I really do enjoy.
What did you think of the trial as a Star Trek fan?
Oh, the trial, I thought,
I loved the trial as a Star Trek fan.
Why is that?
Well, because it was a setup, and that was cool. But also because it gave Kirk and McCoy that panic. We know they're setting us up, but we still have a duty to admit that we're at fault.
Yeah. What was it? This goes back to a line that Picard said in one of the Next Generation episodes to Wesley Crusher. He said that the Starfleet's first duty is always to the truth, whether it's personal truth,
archaeological truth or scientific truth.
And that goes back to, so when it comes to that moment in time, Cook admitted all these things because that's the first duty of a Starfleet officer, is to the truth. It's like, yes, I'm responsible for the conduct of my crew, even though I knew nothing of it, I'm still responsible.
And even though he knew how incriminating it was in that circumstance.
Yeah, his duty was to the truth.
Because truthfully, I enjoyed the trial. Even though I knew it was a show trial, it would be pretty hard not to convict them of a guilty plea, considering the evidence given.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, without that kind of evidence, it also goes back to the guilty until proven innocent issue that a lot of courts can have.
Yes.
Like, they didn't care that the evidence may have pointed to their innocence. They wanted some revenge, basically. They wanted someone to take responsibility for one of their ambassadors dying.
Yeah, even Worf sat there and said that, this evidence is circumstantial. Please take that into account when you pass down your verdict.
Yeah.
And so that's what the judge did.
Yeah, and it was the Worf from TNG's grandfather.
That's what I was about to ask. Because I didn't know his name. And you just said that, and I was like, wait. Because, again, I'm not a Star Trek fan, but I'm familiar with a lot of these names and things like that. Just by cultural osmosis.
I mean, but I really did enjoy the scene, a couple of scenes before this, when the president was talking about what we're gonna do. Are we gonna save these people? And then one of the Starfleet admirals said, Mr. President, those men literally saved this planet. And then the president's like, and I know that, but they're gonna do it again by going on trial. This is the idea of going through that to maintain the peace. They did that to maintain the peace.
Yeah.
The importance of it.
Well, they understood their lives in the grand scheme of things at that point really meant very little.
Yeah.
Also, the Starfleet had to be intellectually consistent.
Yes.
And lawfully consistent. So they couldn't just make an exception because it was Kirk.
Yeah.
And because he had saved the planet countless times before.
This president is not above the law. That was the law.
Exactly.
And I also loved how it basically Cook's entire persona was like when Shane was like, now we get to the heart of the matter when he's like, James Tiberius Cook. That entire line just does a great job in encapsulating his entire persona as a captain at this point, and I loved it.
It reverberates when he says that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So now that
it threw me off though, because I didn't know who the president was. So all of a sudden I'm seeing the dude from that '70s show appear. I'm like, what the crap?
Yeah, I know. That's the thing about all these alien design, alien costumes. It's like, all these people, like, these what I'm looking for, all these appearances from all these actors. Like, you don't know until you actually see it. So
yeah, if you ignore the forehead prosthetics, because admittedly, that's a criticism of a lot of Star Trek, is a bunch of aliens are forehead prosthetics.
Yeah.
You can see that it's an actor. You can recognize the actor through the eyes or the nose or the mouth or something like that.
The
voice.
Yeah. But still, I mean, he did deliver a lot of good lines in this.
No, he did. But I never knew Starfleet even had a president.
Yeah, so
I thought it was a military organization, so I thought it would have like a commander.
No, only Starfleet is a military organization.
But I thought Starfleet...
But the Federation itself, it separates itself. There's a scientific division, and then there's a military division, just in case one of the other warlike races, like the Klingons... Or the Dominion, decide to cause trouble. It's a self-defense force.
Yeah.
Actually, I did not know that. Okay.
This is why you have colleges on shows and at Geek Trivia, so... And now we did a tease about a personal experience when it comes to movie
Well, that's
theaters.
something else I want to talk about. One more scene I want to discuss with you guys. It kind of bogged down the film for me, the mines, like all that in the mines. Like, I understood the necessity of it, it just wasn't especially interesting.
No, it wasn't interesting, but they had, from a writing standpoint, they had to take those characters and put them in a no-win situation, in a desperate situation, and they also had to sit there and... The entire point of that scene was that they wanted Cook and McCoy out of the way. So, of course, from a writing standpoint, they had to go through that process. I know it wasn't really interesting, but it wasn't really the minds that the movie was trying to get at.
No, I get that.
It's writing them out so they don't take the focus, and you then bring the focus over to Spock and all the other crew trying to figure this out.
Which is nothing
without Kirk punching something in the face.
Yeah, you also needed Kirk and McCoy to have that time of reflection, because even though the minds were not interesting, the moment where he was in bed talking about, I never thought to take Gorkin at his word.
Yeah.
He had to see him work out that prejudice and realize that he was wrong.
McCoy and Kirk were the two characters that had the most trouble dealing with this peace agreement.
Well, not McCoy. McCoy wanted more peace than most. I mean, he did say in the trial, I was
But
desperate
because
to
McCoy is so emotionally
Yeah.
driven, his was like, okay,
I think that was important from an emotional
he
standpoint.
mistrusted the piece. He thought maybe it was a ploy or it was a trick.
I think McCoy was more for that piece. I think that's the reason why it was so important that he was there, because he was, again,
That's a good point.
It goes back to that balancing. He is the emotional center of that three-piece.
And Kirk needed that to get over his prejudice.
Exactly. So McCoy was necessary for that to keep that steady.
I like the chemistry between them, though.
Oh, yes.
Because even Kirk or even McCoy at one point says what the audience is all thinking. You always have to look for the women. He says something about that.
Yeah, what is it with you anyway? Still think we're in trouble more than ever. Exactly. But now let's talk about what we were teasing about this personal experience we had with this film.
Yeah.
And when it goes back to growing up, me and my family, our family time, one of the main things we watched growing up was Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah. Every week we would gather around the TV and watch that.
And most people may have watched like The Cosby Show or Full House, those shows, which is fine shows, but we watched Next Generation. We watched Star Trek. That was our family time. So I remember going to the movie theater, and before then, we were always watching lighthearted movies. Star Wars was lighthearted. Even Empire Strikes Back had that lighthearted theme, even though it was a darker tone. And when we went to the movie theater, it was always Oliver and Company or The Little Mermaid. We always experienced some light stuff. And when it comes to Star Trek, we didn't grow up watching Star Trek 2 because our parents were like, okay, there's a lot of questionable scenes in that we don't want us to see. So we always grew up with Star Trek 4. That was a Star Trek film we kept on watching over and over again because it had the least amount of bad scenes in it. So when this movie first came out, when it comes to all the Star Trek films, it had lighthearted music. It was always hopeful and always adventurous music. And after the credits rolled, it always eased you into the story. Well, when you were like 6 years old or 8 years old, I remember going to the movie theater, sitting down, just imagining, the seats being bigger than us and this big screen in front of us and then the 3D sounds. And we were expecting to see this lighthearted Star Trek tone, and then suddenly, after the credits rolled, not credits, but the trailers.
After the trailers.
And after the Paramount.
The trailers even were like weird.
Do you remember?
I don't remember the trailers very clearly, but I remember they were more of a darker tone.
Yeah.
And at first, we thought our parents had mistaken movies.
Yeah, it's like, we put us in the wrong movies.
Brought us to the wrong movies accidentally.
Yeah,
they didn't. Little did we know they knew what they were doing.
Also, after that, even though it's like, okay, movie's about to start, happy tone.
Happy music, because all the Star Treks, they started with, especially Star Trek 4 was that happy kind of, a lot of people say it doesn't fit Star Trek, but it was a happy, bouncy adventurous song.
And then suddenly, the credits roll, and then
the screen fades, and the movie starts.
Then it goes...
And then it starts this slow, dark build-up.
Yeah, it was dark. It was unsettling for us at the age of 6. And then and the music was so intimidating because of the loud sound in the theater. And at that point, the tone was dark. And the minute that the credits ended, like I said, it always eased into it. No, this movie had something explode out of nowhere. So that was loud. It was, like I said, it was unsettling, unexpected. And at that time, it reversed our expectations. Like any other movie before that time.
It became one of our absolute top sci-fi movie openings.
Oh, yeah.
Alongside A New Hope.
Oh, absolutely. Because that menacing theme was always hanging over that movie. And the soundtrack was fantastic. And many people was like, oh, no, I would want to have all the soundtracks consistent, like you said. But this soundtrack was really good.
It's a shame this guy didn't do anything else after this movie. Because he was an excellent composer, conductor.
So, but every time I watch this film, it always transports me back to that moment in the movie theater at the age of 6. Well, looking back, it was one of my favorite movie experiences because of that.
Is this your first movie experience you can remember in a cinema?
No, because I remember watching My Little Mermaid, and that was back in 1988. I also remember watching Oliver and Company.
Although we missed most of that.
Yeah, we missed it, but we still remember that. But at that point in time, it was the most...
It stood out the most.
It stood out the most because it was the first time I witnessed anything that dark. that intimidating. I mean, that scene where the scene where the assassins were going through the Klingon ship, take all that sound, all that chaos, and amplify it in a movie theater. You know how movie theaters are.
Yeah.
Amplify. At the age of 6, that's what I experienced, and everything was dark. Our heroes were being put into these no-win situations, like Empire Strikes Back. Like a 3-act story. The middle one is where everything goes to hell.
Yeah.
This film did that. It was the Empire Strikes Back in that sense without being the middle chapter.
Was it formative? Like, you think that movie experience is part of the reason you are a geek and everything like that? Or was that going to happen anyway?
No, it was going to happen anyway, but I think that...
Yeah, considering how much sci-fi and things of that nature we watched. I mean, Tron, Last Starfighter, I could go on and on.
The Last Navigator, that's the small little thing.
Flight of the Navigator. All of those were our formative geek movies.
Oh, absolutely.
Getting back to the movie itself, going into this movie, I actually didn't know it was the last Star Trek movie with the original cast.
No, okay.
So, like, when they did the send-off thing at the end, I was like, wait, like, this is...
But now I remember also watching that, and it was really...
It was a very emotional send-off for us, because, again, we had watched taped versions
of the original series.
Of the original series my dad had, and so it hit us back then.
And the thing that I don't think we started watching 2 and 3 like later on because of the content, but we kept on watching 4, and this was for us. It was emotional, but I really did, like I said, it was probably the most memorable experiences because it just, for me, it was like it basically took us to the next level of cinema because we experienced something dark and something uneased the entire time, the menacing and tense feel. It was a tense feel.
I remember when I was a kid, I did not like it when they went to Rua Pente because of all the aliens being scary.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And I didn't know what would happen to Kirk and McCoy. I thought they would get beat up or whatever, and it was just like scary aliens.
It was for 6 years old. It was very tense.
Yeah.
Suspenseful too. And so I always remember that because I never experienced anything like that. So I just remember that feeling throughout the entire movie, and I was really unsettled. And I just enjoyed it looking back on it.
I enjoyed that they walked off the fact that it was a send-off into the very core of the film.
Yeah.
Like with the Undiscovered Country and things like that.
The idea of the future, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like these actors are leaving, so what does like Star Trek go? It's Undiscovered Country.
Yeah. I also, going back to those things, going back to the ending speech that Cook had, but the line that the Chancellor said to Cook, where he said, "You don't trust me, I believe it. I understand that, but if there is going to be peace, our generation it's going to be the hardest thing for our generation to live in because we're so used to war."
And that goes with any generation in any war.
Yeah.
I mean, all the people who went through World War II, they had problems adjusting to
peace, with
the Germans.
And then not only that, but also the idea of trying to, the entire Cold War coming up. But I also loved what Cook said at the end of it. It's like, his ending speech he had to the Chancellor. I love when he said to the Madam Chancellor, it's like, some people can be afraid of change. And then she said, "You restored my father's faith." And then he said, "You restored my son's." And that's very important because David's entire thing in Star Trek 2 was he was creating the Genesis torpedo, which was designed to create life. It was designed to, take something that was dead and then recreate it. Then you had the Chancellor who was trying to maintain peace. So you had those two ideas of life and peace and creating an environment where you can have peace, and both those faiths collided.
Specifically, he was referring to possibly, I think, the death of David in 3, that it was a betrayal of sorts to that life-giving Genesis device.
Yeah.
And the dude who made it to terraform planets was killed.
Yeah.
So that you can understand Kirk's perspective being, you betrayed all of what my son had worked so hard to do.
Exactly. So, I mean, it was just...
Even if it wasn't her specifically, it was more the Klingons as a blanket whole, like I referred to earlier.
Yeah. So I thought that it was Star Trek in a nutshell. I love it because of what Star Trek means and what it's about, and this film did a great job of basically taking the entire original series, what all that was about, and just wrapping it up in one final, adventure. So I loved it because of it. So
yeah, I agree. I absolutely love it. My favorite. I still think it's better than 2.
Well, why do you think it's better than 2? Before we go,
mostly because of what we talked about. all of this stuff that goes together with that. 2 was great, don't get me wrong. 2 had the linkage to the original series, had Kirk dealing with an Owen situation.
Him getting old and trying to refine his
getting
youth.
old
Yeah.
and not feeling as young as he was.
Yeah.
His whole bit with the glasses was great in the Star Trek 2.
Yeah, the death of Spock. I mean, there's a lot of great things in that film.
Yeah, especially the death of Spock. Everybody, that's the most memorable scene to a lot of people.
But I think that this film, just what it basically did, and what the last hurrah, the conspiracy, the implications, all of it, I thought that for me, it's I think it's definitely better. So, but. Man, we talked about this movie to death.
We did, and speaking of send-offs, unfortunately, we're going to have to get going.
Yeah, we do, don't worry. But tell the audience what we're going to be talking about next week.
Next week, we're actually going to discuss the film with Brad Pitt. Snatch.
And a whole lot of other people, too. Like Jason
Statham.
Who was the guy who was in episode 8? The guy who had the stutter, the DJ.
Benicio del Toro.
But, I mean, there's a lot of people in this film that's really good. And you haven't seen this film, have you, Paul?
I have not.
Yeah, well, this is a perfect time to see it. This is a perfect time to see it.
Wow.
It is.
It is. So until then, I'm Joseph Collins.
And I'm Paul Coons.
And thanks for having me. I'm Jeffrey Collins.
And you've been listening to the CNC Geekcast.